First refers to the criticism of Jean Lévy, which exposes Julien as a, in quote, a charlatan who knows how to dress up philosophical trivialities in the guise of radical thought. And here's the quote from Lévy. Some collocations borrowed from Foucault and Deleuze, which here and there embellish Julien's discourse, aim at nothing else but to generate the illusion of an innovative analysis. In reality, though, the view of China or the Occident which we find presented is one of the most conventional and traditionalistic. As to Julien's standing as a philosopher, Fabian Heubel observes, according to my view, the philological shortcomings of Julien's writings do not weigh as much as his philosophical failure. I consider his philosophy, owned by sinological insights, to be indispensable for further engagements with Chinese philosophy in Europe, but at the same time it entails a warning. Intercultural philosophy easily risks the danger of transmitting clichés and half-truths, and this not only with regards to Chinese but also to European thought. And toward the end of this discussion, Heubel comes up with the following assessment of Julien's work. I ask myself how it could be possible to get lost to such an extent in clichés and half-truths. But I'm afraid that my own perceptions of Chinese philosophy, how unconscious they may be, are moving in the tracks of the same conceptions. This makes it necessary to critically and self-critically analyze the developments within contemporary European sinology, as drawn out and tiresome such processes may be. Coming to the end, I've quoted these criticisms at length in order to show the ambivalence in the reception of Julien's oeuvre, which is also repeatedly pointed out by Frank, the ambivalence it is. He is critical, but shows at the same time his indebtedness to this prolific writer, giving credit to the inspiration that he draws from it. So only time will tell if Julien's analysis of Chinese thought in his more than 30 books possesses a value that will stand the test of time, or if it is a clever mixture of sinological philology with fashionable French post-structuralism and postmodernism, just a homage to the present philosophical zeitgeist. But this zeitgeist, how critical we may be of it in the end, is our own, as Goethe already mused in Faust. What you, the spirit of the ages, call, is nothing but the spirit of you all, wherein the ages are reflected. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to take this opportunity to hand the word over to William, who will conduct and take direct initiative in responding to this engagement with the book that...
Good, okay. Thank you. Now, oh, you already say, okay, I thought that... well, it's just open for questions, as why did you stay in? So, of course, with the difference that others have not read this manuscript, but you gave a very accurate description. And raised a lot of questions that are common questions, especially for those with sinological interests, which are a majority, I think, of those that are here present. And the first thing for me is to thank you and everyone else as well for the attention given to these texts. It's very moving for me just to hear it reflected through any of you.
A lot of insight from reading.
Well, thanks so much for saying that. I don't take it for granted, and I've heard that from, in some way or other way, from almost everyone, and that is very gratifying. And it's not all that common and frequent for us as humanities scholars. I think we know what it's like to throw out our publications into the public realm, like throwing stones into the sea. And so it really is, very moving to have.
You know what Montaigne said about this book? He said we give much. We raise our
too much attention to our stupidity when we put them into press. When we publish.
Well, that's true, and it's almost impossible not to take ourselves too seriously with our published works and to have too many expectations, and that's why we tend to be disappointed by the reactions. But this is really quite the opposite kind of occasion. And what typically comes with that is some sharp criticism as well. It went over me. That is, I didn't I didn't pick up on the subtle innuendos probably that were there, or that remain unexpressed, which is of course a very important part of what we all have to say. As with my engagement here with Julien, as Karl Heinz has emphasized, he really opened China, the classical Chinese wisdom, to me. I don't know how I would have become interested in the field without having been able to read his books, beautiful French prose. I owe him a great debt of gratitude for that, and I do find him challenging, intriguing. You seem to leave the jury out. As a sinologist, you don't really pronounce upon. People tend to be polarized, and the tendency today, as far as I can hear, is most qualified sinologists want to be very quick about how off base.
I go again with Montaigne. I hold my judgment suspense.
Yeah.
Apophatic.
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's good because there's a distortion of just the academic view, where our job is to critique, to go beyond what's been written and published, and to have something more valid to say. Whereas my direct experience of Julien really began in France, Cerisy-la-Salle, and it was a great collection of admirers. Not there were the professors there to deliver their speeches, but it gathered in a wide public, people from every profession and non-profession who are reading Julien and are enjoying it and learning and were reverential towards him. It goes to his head and does some harm, I think. We've had, many of us have had that experience.
Do you see the philosophical trivialities that were claimed for Julien? Do you see that critique?
I thought about that word as well. Trivialité. This is Jean Lévy.
And Fabian Harder.
That's right. He picks it up as well. Fabian, incidentally, is coming in. Is it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? You're right. Yes. And Nathan has organized this as well. It depends. What is trivial and profound depends on your point of view. You could take Zhuangzi and somebody, it's trivial. You could say this is trivial, but it's also very, very profound, depending on where you're standing, how you come into it. He throws things at you that are trivial until you let it resound and it becomes profound by the way in which you take it. So, I don't think that François Julien is not a superficial, trivial mind. He's part of our academic scene, which induces him to show off in certain ways, and then that does become trivial. But I don't think that he would be holding our attention unless he was a very deep and challenging thinker. That is my experience of him, and he was impressive on the ground as well in France, in engaging all different people's points of view. Although there's also there are a lot of gestures of cutting off and being superior, superb, but he, that too, he has, his attitudes can be offensive and in any case non-productive, and I would accuse him more of that than of really trivial thinking. There's this continuum when we express ourselves between the content of our thinking and then the gesture of presenting your thought to the public, and we're working at all of those levels really in any utterance.
Maybe the question of triviality is also a point of view. These critics, Fabian Heubel, he is a sinologist. So he has a firm grasp of Chinese past, Chinese thought. And I think what he's trying to get at is that, seen from this perspective, he doesn't offer all that much new. It's just the way he kind of spices it with postmodern constructionism, particularly Foucault, Deleuze, people like that, that the thing becomes its own kind of thing.
Then there's the question of to what extent and in what way should it be new? If you're talking about classical Chinese wisdom, it's been a tradition ongoing for millennia. It's not necessarily something brand new that's not been said before that is the most profound thing to say. Plato is not trying to say things that are new, but that does not prevent him from being a very profound philosopher by the coherence and the depth at which he articulates.
I don't think that's the point. The point is rather the way he kind of interprets the Chinese past, Chinese traditional thought. That is also already a long tradition. After all, it goes back to the Jesuits. The way we make sense out of Chinese philosophy, Chinese thought. And that, in that regard, this is only my interpretation. He might not have that groundbreaking insights.
And I just think, generally, if you do have an original mind working as a sinologist, and we have several of them right here among us, it does tend to say something that is groundbreaking within the context of the discipline. I recognize this. I've looked at some of Georg Müller's work recently, and I can sense that this is a groundbreaking presentation of Chuang-Tzu. So I did want to make just a point about newness, which is of course the issue of originality once again, and that's a very relative idea, but so I'm relating it to a certain context of a discipline which consists of a discourse and certain things that are repeated by everyone and that become sort of a common denominator, and then something that gives you an insight that enables you to grasp what everyone is saying, not as simple repetition, but to really experience it and to experience a depth of being through that same idea that comes up in different mouths and
But I mean, the example, the comparison with Fenellosa is actually interesting. You can savor it for a little longer. I mean, Fenellosa was so influential, and stimulating. These people were all kind of boggled their minds, the way he kind of interpreted the Chinese poetry and Chinese language, and took up on that, But after, let's say, 50 or 100 years, you see that it's just it was a way of interpreting things that kind of hit the nerve at the time, but was by itself was actually wrong. So I don't want to say that Julien's interpretation is wrong. It's just it also hits the nerve of our time. this is the point that you also make. You know, he's addressing an audience. He has this audience in mind. When a writer writes for a special audience, he's particularly understanding that he has. You know, he's not an armchair scholar who just writes and collects data and publishes his findings. He has by now he has a nimbus. You know, he's certainly somebody. And
which is already a problem really for a sage, right? Who's on the way to becoming nobody.
Yeah.
But it's true, he's been overtaken by François Julien as a phenomenon, as a philosopher, a presence, and that maybe has in some ways corrupted the original insight that he was translating from the classical Chinese into the contemporary Western French idiom.
But as I've used for Hegel, is returning anew. That is to say, you come back to a completely new place, which is impossible logically. You can't go back to something that has not existed before. But negation is required in order to return anew. And I just wonder if our scholarly endeavors are constantly returning anew. What we do with our knowledge is come back to something that is groundbreaking, which logically doesn't hold. And that's Nietzsche. I think we need to bring Nietzsche in here, because we've not had Nietzsche today.
I was hearing.
We can't go through the whole thing on Apophaticism without Nietzsche being raised.
Good, yes. The return, the eternal return. And it sounded even somewhat Heideggerian. Coming to ourselves out of the future. And I do think that the Chinese wisdom is being discovered here as a tremendous resource for these tasks and démarches of our Western philosophy. It's really, the more I, together with many of you here, learn about the Chinese sources, it really is making our own apophatic wisdom intelligible, compelling, and lucid in a way that it's...
If I can just add to that, Zhuangzi would say this returning to a constantly reborn beginning type of thing happens not through negation, but through forgetting. And one of the key values of Taoism is forgetting through different stages. The first one is everything about Mencius and Confucius, the Confucian values of ritual propriety, benevolence, all these moral characteristics, right? And then Zhuangzi would say, after you've forgotten outwardly how to present yourself to the world, you can forget the concept of self itself. So then you return, quite literally and metaphorically simultaneously, to the root, to the beginning. And when you've forgotten self, then what is left? Right? Well, then there is only the bareness of the beginning. And with the bareness of the beginning surrounding you and enveloping you, then you see the world as a holistic, I wouldn't say organism, but in all of its wholeness, free of dividedness and division and the need for negation or confirmation or so on. You just accept as it is. So Julien, in becoming full of himself, is becoming less Taoist and more Confucian. Clinging to names, titles, recognition. The Taoist would dismiss that. Voluntarily say, I don't need that. Forget that. Yeah.
The forgetting that you describe, the forgetting of self, that one achieves or that is accomplished in the course of time, in maturing, how is that different then? Is that different from a starting point before you had anything to forget. I know the figure of the child is important in Zhuangzi. Is that a figure for the sage who has become a child? The way you describe that just makes me wonder if the forgetting leaves something as well. We forget the conscious mind that had been accumulated over time. Is there something, nevertheless, that has been gained? Or are we really back to a point before the experience?
Not experience, but the acquiring of knowledge,
Okay.
of ways of. I mean, if you read Ricoeur, reading Augustine on forgetting, memory, and so on, right? Taoism is the opposite of that. It's a kind of releasement of one's commitments to moral, social norms.
Right.
So you rediscover, you recreate yourself by returning to the time of one's infancy, where you haven't been told what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad.
Right.
And so on.
But as a recreated self, you're a sage in a way that the infant is not. Is that accurate, or is that
because
not a
you
distinction that?
you have hindsight of knowing the dangers of the use of names and the destruction that comes about in using names and rational thinking to view the world and to break apart its integrity, its wholeness, its poetic beauty, if you will. So the forgetting is a kind of releasement, right? We mentioned Gelassenheit. So Taoism, I know Heidegger was talking about Meister Eckhart, but when I read that, that's what Taoism is also trying to achieve. This releasement from our social conditioning to return to the original, pure, undefiled state of human nature, which is as the newborn baby, who has to be taught differences and discriminations and so on. So Taoist is yes, you are reborn as someone who has wisdom, but it's a wisdom that you let go.
There's a dialectic of innocence and experience. We have the songs of innocence and experience, for example, that are not too far from some of the cultural matrices that have been evoked here. And that dialectic emphasizes very much the difference between plain innocence and the innocence regained at the other end of experience.
Yeah, Zhuangzi talks about the naivety of the Confucians, the believing in the affirmative power of names or of certain virtue qualities as the only solution to reaching a higher state of self-awareness, of cultivation, of moral perfection. Zhuangzi always criticizes and mocks Confucius for being too full of himself, and too proud of himself, and says you're no better than the illiterate peasants. You don't know anything. In spite of this wisdom, you don't know true wisdom, which is to transcend the very concept of wisdom and clinging to wisdom and lording it over others and so on. So.
This is exactly the topic of midi. How do you say that? Yeah, Georg's and your I'm missing the other part of it. Le midi, no, le Académie du Midi. This was really exactly the topic that Georg and Karl-Heinz had organized last summer, and I think it's one that will reoccur and transformed probably in future occasions. There is still someone, yeah. Hideko.
Just a brief comment, and I hope you won't be irresponsible meta commentary from a disciplinary outsider. I'm sorry, I have a cold.
Do you want to come up? Maybe? Yeah.
Well,
Maybe give her the mic.
if you can hear me, Thank you. Hello.
Can you hear me? Yes. I'm an anthropologist by training, and therefore you can ask me later if my reading of Professor Franke's book is shallow or misguided. But for me, it was very useful in a sense that it really made me think that what we do in anthropology is actually pursuing this unsayable in any given culture. Therefore, I thought, as a custom, I tend to always substitute. When I see a book title, Philosophy of Something, I immediately think of an anthropology of something. So a philosophy of something, that made me think, okay, an anthropology of the unsayable, is it possible? And then I realized, okay, that's something we are actually always often after, which is to say, we are always looking for the unsayable, which encompasses in another culture, or when encountering any other, the unsayable, unmentionable in a given culture, and inarticulable, and also, perhaps more importantly, what's rendered inaudible through different processes. So I thought, okay, this is something that helps us theorize more about the ethics of anthropology, anthropological practice, and the ethics of any encounter with the other. I think I'm forgetting what. Oh, and I guess what I got from the book is that any encountering with another, encounter with another, or a dialogue with another necessarily generates the unsayable. And that's something that's also, I guess, at the heart of the resonator of our discipline. And I don't know if it makes sense. Another thing I wanted to ask is whether, well, when I come to any philosophy event, which is what I think is a universalist discipline compared to other, well, something like anthropology, is there assumption at work that the West and China are utterly incommensurable culturally? When for example, someone says culture, oh, by the way, it's the West, is there, do we take it for granted that it's incommensurable? But by somehow introducing the idea of apophatism, can we make the incommensurability of China or the East commensurate with the incommensurability of the West? I'm not really sure if I'm making sense, but that's sort of what evoked, what was evoked by reading Professor Frankel's work. I don't know. Sorry.
No, I think one short but pertinent answer to your last question is the spirit of apophaticism is really the unmaking of sense, even more than the making of sense. Every making of sense occurs within an unmaking of sense. Because of this encounter with the other, the incommensurable. Of course, positing incommensurabilities, this is, Julien is invested in very much presenting these two different cultures without contact historically until modern times, and therefore being